I was doing some research on this ultra-orthodox Jewish Israeli military unit known as Netza Yehuda Brigade, which means Judah's Victory Brigade. Netzra means victory. It's kind of like the Arabic word Nasr, like in Nasrallah, victory. So Judah's Victory Brigade. And I talked about this unit in my last video, and I did some more research on them. And yes, my beliefs about them have been confirmed. They are just as sick and evil and crazy as I thought and said they were. These people are part of the Haradim Jewish sect, which is the ultra-orthodox sect of Judaism. And they are, I want to say probably, but I'm pretty certain I'm correct. So I'm just going to go out on a limb here and just say that the Haradim are the most hated people in all of the Jewish world. In Israel, people just despise them. And the reason why people despise them is because a lot of them, most of them, are unemployed. Yes, most of them are unemployed and they are living off of government funds. And almost none of them are in the military, although that is changing very quickly. But for decades, the great majority of them, almost all of them, were resistant to the idea of mandatory military conscription. So they just did not want to join the military. And so every single year in Israel, there was just this absolutely acrimonious contention over whether or not the Haradim need to be drafted into the military. Well, that's changing, and that really began to change after the October the 7th massacre. So now you have around 30% of the Haradim saying that they would like for more Haradim to join the military, or really around 30% of them have said that they want to join the military, and they are in favor for Haradim just honoring the mandatory conscription rule in Israel. So they have a military unit in Israel consisting of just Haradim. It's called the Netza Yehuda Brigade or Battalion. And these people are sick. They are the most vicious unit in all of the IDF. And there was a very informative article that was published yesterday on Haaretz, and it's an article exposing just how crazy these people are, just how sick these people are. And I want to show you guys some examples, some excerpts from this article. The article begins by talking about an incident that occurred on April of 2021, so this was a number of years ago. And it talks about how there was this Palestinian family. They were in their car. They were driving home. It was around 9 p.m. at night. And some IDF soldiers stopped them. And these soldiers were from the Netza Yehuda Battalion. They stop the car. They pull the father out of the car. And they beat this guy like crazy. They viciously beat this man up to the point where he was shaking and he was passing out. That's how badly they beat this man. And according to the article, it says, at around 9 p.m., a Palestinian family was driving down a road near the entrance to the settlement of Ofra in the West Bank. Soldiers ordered the driver to pull over. They pulled him out of the car and beat him like crazy, said a soldier from a different unit who witnessed the incident. At some point there on the road, the driver started to shake and they saw that he was passing out. Now, I just want to make a side note here. I really have to give it to the Israelis because while you do have problems in Israel, and while you do have evil in Israel, you still have a lot of Israelis who come out and say, this is wrong. So you have a bunch of Israeli soldiers doing something that's evil, but then you'll have a whole bunch of other Israeli soldiers who come out and say, listen, I saw this, I witnessed this, and it's wrong. So I have to give credit to Israeli society for this because, listen, if you have a bunch of Palestinian terrorists doing something that's vile and evil, you're not really going to have a whole lot of Palestinians coming out to expose those Palestinians, because in the Palestinian society, they have a culture of collective dishonesty, and they will collectively defend people who perpetrate really horrendous crimes, because in Palestinian society, they have a culture of collective denial, collective dishonesty, and that's a part of the dysfunction of Palestinian society. Whereas in Israeli society, you will have Israelis who do evil, but you'll have other Israelis who come out and expose them. Now, the problem with Haradim culture, and you'll see this in the article, Haradim culture also has a culture of collective dishonesty, collective denial. Because when members of the Netza Yehuda battalion do something that's evil, the other members of the battalion will protect those perpetrators, and they will deny that those soldiers did anything wrong. And they will collectively hide and cover up for their fellow Haradim soldiers. Because in the Haredi culture, there is a culture of collective dishonesty and collectively being bad faith, collectively just being schmucks. Now, the thing about the Haradim, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the Haradim for decades were resistant to the idea of joining the military, etc., etc. The thing about the Haradim is that they have always been at odds with the Israeli government. They have always had tensions with the Israeli government, with the police. Why? Because the Israeli government, members of the Israeli government, have pushed the Haradim to integrate with the rest of society and to work, to not be unemployed and living off of welfare, and also to partake in the mandatory conscription that the rest of the Israeli people follow. So there is this, the Haradim are their own nation. They're their own society. They are their own culture. So when you put them in the military and you give them their own unit, they will treat that unit like their own military. They won't treat that unit as the military of the Israeli government and society. They will treat that unit as their own paramilitary force. And this is what's going on in Israel with this Netza Yehuda battalion. And so now the Israeli government is saying to the Haradim, you guys need to join the military. And there has been weeks and weeks of very tense discussion between the representatives of the Haradim and the Israeli government on a proposal, on a plan by which to get members of the Haradim to be drafted into the military. And there has been a proposal. It hasn't been officially passed yet, but there is a proposal, and the proposal says that within a number of years, or for a number of years, about 24% of yeshiva students will be drafted into the military. I want to say that they want to draft 24% within a number of years, or if it's not that, then it's 24% each year for a number of years. And then they want to increase that number from 24% to 50% of the yeshiva students from the Haradim. So under this proposal, if it's officiated, eventually 50% of the yeshiva students in the Haradim will be drafted into the military, which would mean that you'll have a huge army, a huge number of these ultra-religious people, ultra-religious Jewish people in the military with guns and elite training. And because these people are so separated from the rest of society, because they have made this very intense demarcation between them and the rest of Israeli society. They will treat that military unit as their own. And you're already seeing it with the Netzah Yehuda Brigade. The Netzah Yehuda Brigade treats itself as its own army. And that's why there's so much insubordination coming from this unit. There's a lot of disobedience coming from this unit, and they really don't honor orders or rules. So the Netzah Yehuda Brigade is an example as to what the future holds if you have a huge chunk of the IDF being Haradim. You'll have a huge chunk of the IDF being rebellious, insubordinate, not obeying orders, and taking the law into their own hands and committing atrocities. And I'll talk more about this as I go on in this video recording. So this soldier who was not a part of the Netzah Yehuda, he served as an eyewitness, and he said that I saw these Haradim soldiers just beating the crap out of this guy to the point where he was shaking and passing out. And the article goes on to say that the April 2021 incident initially seemed to be fairly normal. The soldiers said they stopped the car because they feared that the driver would attempt a ramming attack, and this turned out to be a lie. Like I said, they have a culture of collective dishonesty. The article goes on to say that, but according to eyewitnesses, there was nothing suspicious about the way the car was being driven. Moreover, half an hour into the incident, now this is why I have to give credit to Israel, to Israeli society. This is why I have to give credit to Israel. Because these Netzah Yehuda lunatics were saying, well, we thought this guy was a terrorist. We thought he was going to ram people with the car, blah, blah, blah. And eyewitnesses, Israeli eyewitnesses, came out and said, no, that's a bunch of bullcrap. That's a lie. Half an hour into the incident, the Shin Bet Security Service, the police, and the Army Central Command ruled out an attempted attack. This is why I say I have to give credit to Israel. Because yes, you have this sort of crap happening where you have these evil people like the Netzah Yehuda soldiers, but then you have people in the Shin Bet, you have people in the Army Central Command, you have people in the police coming out and saying that's a lie and just putting a stop to it. So you have this huge, violent difference between the Haradim and the rest of Israeli society. Whereas in the rest of Israeli society, you have people who will come out and say, this is wrong, this is evil, this is immoral, that's a lie, etc., etc. But then you have the Haradim who they're in their own world. They are their own culture, and it's a very insidious culture. Very insidious culture. And so, but the problem is that they're the ones having all the kids in Israel. They right now make up 13% of Israeli society. They make up 13%. That's huge. That means out of every 100 Israelis, 13 of them are Haradim, and their numbers are growing. Why? Because they are dominating the demographic struggle in Israel. People for years have said that the Arabs are the ones having all the kids. That's not the case. That's a huge misconception that people have. It's a huge misconception. The ones who are having the most of the children are the ultra-orthodox in Israel. So they are winning the demographic war. Now, I'm not blaming them for having kids. That's their right to have children. If anything, the moderate, the more politically moderate, more secular Israelis, they are complaining about the Haradim, but they're not having a lot of kids. They're having 1 to 2 kids, or a lot of the times they're not having any children. They're walking around with cats or something. And they're complaining about the Haradim. Well, why are you complaining about the Haradim when you guys ain't having the kids? If you guys want to win the culture war against the Haradim, then you guys need to be having all the kids, but you're not. Which really goes to show that the future belongs to those who have children. The ones who win the demographic war are the ones who have the most kids. That's just the bottom line. And it's not the case where you have immigrants from Africa living in Israel having all the kids. No, no, no. These are members of your own Jewish society having most of the children, and you don't like them because they have such an insidious culture. But if you want to beat them, you guys need to have all the kids. That's just the bottom line. But you guys don't want to have all the kids because you guys want to go to nightclubs in Tel Aviv and smoke hookah. So this is your own demise. You guys have made your own demise by not having children. And these guys, these psychopaths, are the ones who are winning. So that is the sad outcome of this reality. But the Haredim, they have such a different culture, and they have this mentality that we are different. We are different, and you guys really aren't real Jews because you're not religious like we are. And I've seen this. From my own personal experience, I knew a guy who was ultra-orthodox, and he lived in Israel. And he did not consider secular Jews to be real Jews. He didn't. He said those people aren't even Jews. So there's this idea that in Jewish society, a Jew will not harm another Jew. But what if you have an ultra-Orthodox Jew who doesn't see another Jew as a Jew? Then that rule doesn't apply. And that's why you will have ultra-Orthodox Jews fighting other Jews and fighting even Israeli police officers and spitting on other Israeli police officers, on Israeli police officers, because they don't really see those people as real, authentic Jews, or they don't see those people as Jewish as they are. So they see them as less than. Reminds me of when that guy assassinated the Israeli prime minister, I think it was Yitzhak Rabin, was assassinated by some lunatic by the name of Yigal Amir. And you know what's so crazy about that story, and this really ties into what I'm talking about, the overall theme of this video. What's so crazy is that it wasn't just, and this really goes to show that this whole idea that, a Jew won't harm another Jew, that stuff goes out the window when people's ideological interests come before morality. What's so crazy about that story, about the assassination of Rabin, was that it wasn't just one guy just getting a gun and shooting the prime minister. It may look like it was merely that. Oh, it was just a crazy guy, a fanatic who got a gun and just shot the prime minister of Israel. But it was really an entire culture that killed Yitzhak Rabin. Because for, I want to say, weeks prior to the assassination, there were a whole bunch of people, both in Israel and in the United States. This crap was happening in the United States. There were a whole bunch of people saying that Yitzhak Rabin is, and they used a Hebrew word that means something to the likes of collaborator or traitor to the Jewish people. I believe the word is mosher. And let me just look this up real quick. I don't want to get this wrong. But I think it was mosher. Pretty certain that was the word, mosher. And what this word means is something to the likes of collaborator, because Yitzhak Rabin was making a deal with the Palestinians, and part of the deal was basically the Palestinians getting territory, and you had these settlers who wanted Rabin dead. And so you had a whole army of rabbis coming out saying that Rabin is really no longer a Jew. And if you want to kill him, it's open season. That's basically what all these rabbis were saying. And they were rabbis in America saying, oh, Yitzhak Rabin is a collaborator. He's a traitor to the Jewish people. And in that particular religious persuasion, once someone, regardless if he's Jewish or not, but once a Jewish person gets that label of collaborator and that label of traitor Once he gets it, Mosher, I was correct, Mosher. Once he gets that label, then it's open season. He doesn't even deserve to live. And I'm surprised that this sort of thing was happening in the United States. There were rabbis in America saying that Rabin is a Moser, that Rabin is a collaborator, he's a traitor. That's incitement. They were basically saying, go ahead and kill the Prime Minister of Israel. And this crap was happening in America. How was that legal? That's incitement to violence. And a guy, some lunatic named Yigal, Yigal Amir, I can't remember this guy's, I have difficulty remember. Yigal Amir, yeah. Some lunatic named Yigal Amir just took a gun and shot this guy. So people think, oh, it's just one lunatic. No. It's an entire culture that killed Yitzhak Rabin. Because after Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, people were celebrating. There were people all over the settlements in the West Bank who were celebrating. They were clapping their hands. They were smiling. They were praising Yigal Amir as a hero. Just like you have Palestinian terrorists who will say that a terrorist is a hero. Just like you have Palestinians who will praise a terrorist, who will praise Hamas. You have that sort of culture, that insidious culture of collective praise for murder and collective denial in the Jewish world. It's in the ultra-orthodox. It's in the ultra-nationalist. And you have this thing in the settlement world. And there were people that were praising Amir as a hero. So it wasn't just a guy who got a gun and shot the prime minister. It was an entire culture that murdered Yitzhak Rabin. And that culture is sadly growing in the IDF. And you're already seeing it in the Netzah Yehuda battalion. You're already seeing it. And this battalion is going to grow. Why? Because after October the 7th, a whole bunch of these ultra-Orthodox Jews started to join the military. And the opinion changed amongst the Haradim. Because before October the 7th, I think it was around 10% of the Haradim said that Haredi Jews should join, or ultra-Orthodox Jews should join the military. And then it went up about 20 points, around 20 points or so after October the 7th. So now the number is at around 30% of the ultra-Orthodox Jews who believe that ultra-Orthodox Jews should join the military, and they themselves want to join the military. So the culture is changing, and the numbers of these people in the IDF are swelling. Now, there is another reason as to why. It's not just their ideology. It's also the fact that they're being pushed by the government to join the military. Now, why are they being pushed by the government? Well, it's very, very simple. It's because Israel has a very large young population, and Israel also has a very high birth rate. I know, right? It's a first world country. Why does it have such a high birth rate? First world countries are not known for their high birth rates, right? Japan, America, the UK, Germany, these are all first world countries. They're not known for having high birth rates. They're actually known for having low birth rates. But Israel is a country that is a first world nation, one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, and it has a very high birth rate. And that's because of the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab populations in Israel. And so here you have all the secular people in Israel who are not having that many children, but you have the ultra-Orthodox Jews who are having the highest number of births, the highest rate of births. So what's the future look like? Because the people who are having the highest rate of births, the highest rate of children, are also people who have a very high unemployment rate, who are living off of welfare, and who for decades have shirked military enlistment. And Israel is in a place where they have Hezbollah on one side, they have Hamas on another side, they have Iran. Pretty soon Turkey is going to be a serious problem, a serious threat for Israel. The world is becoming more and more unstable, more and more volatile. And so what does the future hold in a society where the people who are having the most kids are, for the most part, unemployed and don't want to join the military? That's a very, very dangerous situation for the future. So things are going to have to change. Hey, the secular people who have been fighting in the military, they're not having a lot of kids. So the future doesn't look the future for them as far as young people go. As far as young people goes, that it's not looking too bright for them. So we're gonna have to force the ultra-orthodox to start joining the military, because how are we going to defend Israel if tens of thousands of young people are not joining the military and they're just reading the Talmud all day? So things have to change. And by getting them into the military, you now put them in a place where they're not reading the Torah every day like before. They're now soldiers with elite training and with weapons. And they have this ideology of Jewish domination. They have this ideology of Jewish supremacy. They have this ideology that all of the land, including the West Bank, including Gaza, belong to the Jewish people. And so they believe in ethnically cleansing the Palestinians out. And politically, they're very far right. This is why people like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are politically representing the ultra-Orthodox. And now you give these people elite training and weapons, and now they're in a place where they can carry out their ideology through violence. And it's a very, very dangerous combination. It's a very dangerous atmosphere. On top of that, these people don't like secular Israeli society. On top of that, they don't like the government. They don't like a lot of the police force. So there's a friction between the secular Israelis who want to keep the Israel that they have been loving for all their lives. They want to keep that culture of secular society. And then on the other side, you have these ultra-Orthodox who want to make a theocratic Talmudist society where kosher law would be imposed, where certain conversions to Judaism would not really be recognized, right? Conversion to Reformed Judaism as opposed to Orthodox Judaism would not be recognized. And how can, if the secular Israelis want to maintain the Israel that they want to live in, how are they going to do so when you have this wave of ultra-Orthodox Jews who are growing tremendously? It's the type of atmosphere where you have a civil war. And that's the fear that I have for Israel. And now that you have all these ultra-Orthodox Jews who are going to be joining the military, well, they were fanatics before, but they weren't really dangerous physically because they didn't have training. But what's going to happen when they do have training? What's going to happen when they do have the weapons? And they follow their rabbis more than they follow their governments. That's another thing about the Haradim society, the ultra-Orthodox society. They are very obedient to their rabbi. They're more obedient to their rabbis than they are to their government. So what happens when their rabbis make a decree and say, these secular Jews really aren't real Jews, so they're all molshers, they're all evil, and they should be gotten rid of. What's going to happen when these rabbis say these Arabs do not belong in the land, purge Israel of the Arabs? What's going to happen? You're going to have massive bloodshed, massive violence. What happened to Yitzhak Rabin is a microcosm of what would happen if these ultra-Orthodox Jews are in a position where they can inflict violence, or in a position where they feel emboldened enough to inflict violence. Because just as they declared Yitzhak Rabin to be a Mosher, to the point where he was open season for violence, these very people have a very dangerous capacity to be doing the same thing to the rest of Israeli society, or the part of Israeli society that they don't like. Let's go back to the article. So it has here a quote from a soldier from a different unit, and he talks about how these ultra-Orthodox Jewish soldiers pulled this man out of his car. They beat him up. They severely beat him up to the point where he was shaking and he was passing out. And it quotes this soldier who is from a different unit. Quotes the soldier who's from a different unit. And he says, there were people there who tried to treat the Palestinian who was in bad shape because of the beating. They yelled at the Netzah Yehuda medic to come help, but he refused. So here's this man. He is passing out. He's shaking. He's been severely beaten. And this Israeli guy, or these Israelis, are saying to the medic who's a part of the Netzah Yehuda unit, hey, come and help this man. And he doesn't help. He refuses to help this man. Why? Because he's a Palestinian. He's inferior. And this medic said, oh, this man's a terrorist, so to hell with him. Well, he wasn't a terrorist. That's a lie. And this soldier goes on to recount how, quote, they even refused to provide the water they asked for to treat the Palestinian. It was an insane incident. And so this is a microcosm of how these people are. And this is a microcosm of how these people would be in the case of them executing a plan or a policy of ethnic cleansing, and also executing a plan of violence against other Jewish people. They see people who are not them as inferior. The driver and his family were released after being detained for 2 hours. The driver was transferred to a Palestinian ambulance. The rest of the family wanted to return to their car, but then they discovered that the keys had disappeared. And here's another example of what I mean by collective dishonesty. They asked the soldiers, who said they knew nothing about it. Hey, where's our keys? We want to go home. I don't know. For more than an hour, they searched for the car keys, said a person who was present at the scene. Only an hour and a half later, when the deputy battalion commander showed up and started to search, did they find the keys at their outpost near the room. So for an hour and a half, they were searching, and then they find the keys in the Netzah Yehuda outpost, which meant that they stole the keys because they wanted to steal the car. And they knew that the family wanted to drive home, but they kept the keys so that the family would be forced to walk somewhere or call a cab so that they could then steal the car. And then they collectively denied that they had the keys, which is an indication that they have a culture of collective dishonesty and collective thievery. For an hour and a half, they lied to the entire world, and this did not bother them at all. And this is a red flag that gauges how evil this culture is. In fact, the Netzah Yehuda will even be violent towards other Israelis. And I've talked about this, and I'll get more into this. The Netzah Yehuda, as I said before, acts like it's its own army, and that's because the Ultra-orthodox in Israel act like they are their own government. They have violently severed themselves from the rest of Israeli society, and this is reflected in this military unit. And I cannot emphasize on this enough, because if you give these people their own military unit, which Israel has done, what you have is lawlessness. What you have is insubordination and just disobedience to orders, because they don't see themselves as the rest of Israeli society. They see themselves as being the real Israel. We're the real Israel. This is our army. You guys are telling us what to do. To hell with you. That's how they see things. This article goes on to say, people familiar with the battalion might be shocked at the details of this incident, but not at the fact that it occurred. Officers and soldiers past and present who have served in the battalion or are familiar with it say that for years it has set its own moral and professional standards, and the top brass has turned a blind eye. Now, why does the upper echelons of the Israeli military turn a blind eye to these people acting like they are their own army? The reason for this is because the Netzah Yehuda battalion is extremely popular amongst the Israeli settlers. Now, how many Israeli settlers are there? I think there's close to 1 million or around 1 million Israeli settlers. In the West Bank alone, you have 700,000+ settlers, and then in East Jerusalem, you have, I want to say, around 400,000 or so. So we're talking about roughly or so 1 million settlers. It's a huge chunk of the Israeli population. And the Netzah Yehuda soldiers are very popular amongst the settlers. So if you disband the Netzah Yehuda battalion, it would be effectively a declaration of war on the settlers. and the settlers would be extremely upset, and that may destabilize things, and Israel does not want this to happen. So there is a Netza Yehuda soldier who was quoted in the article, and he says, "We would go out on routine operations in the villages, and suddenly one of the guys would throw a stun grenade at a home or a passing car, just for laughs." Yes, that's how these people are. Just for laughs. I thought you guys were in the business of fighting terrorists. I thought you guys had to defend Israel. Why are you guys throwing stun grenades at people's homes? Random people's homes. Oh, and what would you be doing by throwing stun grenades at people's homes? You're making more terrorists. Because if somebody throws a stun grenade at your house or inside of your house and laughs about it, and then some terrorists come along and say, "Hey, join us. We're going to fight these bastards," guess what you're going to be doing? You're either going to join the ranks of the terrorists or you're going to at least support the terrorist. So these people are just making more terrorists. It's important to someone in the battalion to constantly show that they're a different force in the sector. So we are our own force. And they emphasize on expressing that they are not really a part of the military, or they're not like all the rest of the units, that they are their own thing. That we, unlike all the brigades that are replaced every few weeks, live this sector and know what to do, etc., etc. So we're better than everyone else. Palestinians in the town of Sinjil near Ramallah reported that Netza Yehuda soldiers smashed the windows of a home, broke in, and threatened the family with a gun. Yes, and this is pretty common behavior for these ultra-orthodox soldiers. There was an inquiry into this incident. The whole thing was improper operationally, a source at Central Command said. At the end of the inquiry, the orders and regulations were clarified to the soldiers, but this was another inquiry and clarification of the regulations with no penalty. So they just keep doing the same thing, right? These people commit a crime, they break into someone's home, they point a gun at the family, they scare people, they have this superiority complex that they are manifesting, and then the military has to come along and say, hey, you're breaking the rules. Here are the rules. Let me just clarify the rules to you guys. And they keep doing this, but there's no difference in their behavior because there are no penalties. A defense official remembered a Central Command meeting about 2 years ago after another incident involving Netza Yehuda. According to the document that followed, most of the combat soldiers from the battalion are from families who live in the area. This makes it harder for them to separate their personal opinions from the demands of their commanders. Translation, they are all part of the same culture, and the culture is insidious. People at the meeting wondered how to move forward. One option was to dissolve the battalion and place its soldiers in other units. We very quickly realized that dissolving the Netza Yehuda would be a declaration of war for the settler leadership. And this is what I was saying earlier. The defense official said, their view on the ground is that this battalion belongs to them, that it's a force that works for the settlement enterprise. It seems no one in the military disputes this. In routine times, the heads of the settler leadership show up at the battalion freely and talk to the soldiers, the defense official said. And my mouse the battery for my mouse literally just died, so I'm going to have to plug it into my charger and then use my keyboard here to move my notes. The defense official said, rabbis come to the post and move around freely, give classes, and talk with the soldiers about operational incidents. It's a kind of phalange, a militia. So a phalange is a paramilitary, or it's a militia. Now, the word phalange is very interesting. The fact that this guy would use this word is interesting, to me at least, because the phalange were also a paramilitary organization in Lebanon. They called themselves the Phalangists, and they were allies with Israel. They were a proxy for Israel. They were trained and armed by Israel, and the Phalangists did probably the most horrific massacre of Palestinians in the history of the Palestinians. They butchered Palestinians for about 3 days, killing between 1,000 to 3,000 people in just a matter of days. They raped, pillaged, stole, and committed mass murder. And they were the Lebanese Phalangists. Well, these ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, Jewish Israelis, they have formed their own phalange. They are their own They are phalangist in their own right. And you can see how they're acting already. And this is them with rules. This is them with rules. They have something of a leash around their necks. And the holder of the leash is the Israeli government. But even with that leash, they are still lawless. They're still doing their own thing. Imagine them being completely unleashed. It would be like the Lebanese phalangist. They would be raping, killing, murdering. They would just be awful. They would be committing atrocities. I'll just put it that way. They will be committing atrocities. I don't want to get into the details. I don't want to make predictions as to the details of what they could do, but they will be committing atrocities. That's obvious. I don't think you need to be a whiz at geopolitics to see that. In fact, a lot of people in the geopolitical realm aren't really talking a whole lot about this. They're talking about Iran, they're talking about Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., but there's not really a whole lot of talk about this growing monster within Israeli society, this growing monster. The fact is that who's having most of the kids? The question is, who's having most of the kids in Israel? It's the ultra-orthodox, which means that they're eventually going to have a serious place in the Israeli military. They're going to have in massive numbers, elite training, military training for one of the most advanced militaries in the world, the Israeli Armed Forces. So what's going to happen when you have all these people who hate the government, who hate secular Israeli society, getting training in massive numbers and being armed to the core? And on top of that, you have the settlers who are very well armed. A lot of them are very well trained because a lot of them have been in the military. And what happens when you have the settlers and the ultra-Orthodox people joining forces? You're talking about a huge force, a very, very dangerous force. Thinking about, and this is my observation, the settlers joining the militarily trained ultra-Orthodox, that would be a very, very dangerous force. A very dangerous force. And it's the ultra-Orthodox and it's the nationalists who want to overhaul the Supreme Court in Israel. They agree with Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. They want that. But what's causing all of these demonstrations in Israel? What's been causing all of these massive demonstrations in Israel? It's the Likud party's aspiration to diminish the power of the Supreme Court. And why do they want to diminish the power of the Supreme Court? It's because they want to establish religious law. That's what this comes down to. They want to establish a kosheria, my little play on words there, Sharia law and kosher. They want to establish a kosheria society to where you can't eat certain foods on the Sabbath, or you can't eat certain foods during Passover. You can't eat during the Sabbath. You have to follow the Sabbath. You have to do, etc., etc., etc. You can't work during the Sabbath, etc., etc., etc. They want to establish halakhic or Jewish law, and they want to make it official law. They want to make Israel into a theocratic society. Well, the secular Israelis, they see this as a greater threat than Hamas. They see this as a greater threat than anything outside of Israel. And they would be willing to fight against these people. This is why I'm saying that I believe that a civil war in Israel is very, very possible. And go back to Josephus's history on the Roman-Jewish War, one of the greatest works of literature ever written, in my opinion. Josephus talks about how there were these different factions in Judea after the time of Christ. There were these different factions, and these factions were there when Christ was on earth. You had the Zealots, you had the Pharisees, and you had the Sadducees. And the Zealots were the most fanatic. They were theologically speaking, they agreed with the Pharisees, but they differed with the Pharisees in regards to obedience to the state. The Zealots did not really agree with obedience to a non-Jewish state. Well, the ultra-Orthodox, they are basically the Zealots that Josephus described. And they, like the Zealots in the past, don't really agree with following government orders. They agree on rebellion, just like the Zealots did in the past. And the Zealots were people who butchered other Jews in the name of the temple. because you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were fighting against the Romans. But the Zealots made the accusation that the establishment religious order in Israel, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were going to surrender to the Romans, and they were going to, in turn, surrender the temple to Roman rule. And so they committed a massacre on the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They committed a massacre of just the regular Jews because they didn't see those regular Jews as Jews worthy of life. They saw them as worthy of destruction. And so they committed a massacre, and they went into the temple and they butchered thousands of people. And Josephus recounts how on the steps of the temple you could see just puddles of blood flowing down the steps. It was pretty demonic. It was pretty horrendous. Now, it's very interesting that the Zealots, according to Josephus, had an ally. Their ally was the Arab Jews. You had Arab Jews who were living in Idumea, which is today's Jordan, and the Zealots sent a letter to the Idumean Jews, to the Arab Jews. And in the letter, they said that you have these people who are going to sell out the temple to the Romans. They're going to surrender the temple to the Romans. And the Arab Jews got on their horses or camels or whatever, and they marched by the thousands. They rode by the thousands into Judea. They went into Jerusalem, and they entered the temple, and they just committed a massacre. They committed an entire bloodbath because they believed in their fanatic heads that these Jews were enemies of the temple. But what's happening in Israel now? You have the Arab Jews, many of whom let me just rephrase that because I don't want to say that all Arab Jews are this way, but in the Arab Jewish demographic, you have a lot of fanatics, a lot of ultra-nationalists. And you also have the ultra-orthodox Jews who are not Mizrahi, they're not of Arab origin. And they're also very nationalistic, very zealous. And they're allies. These people are allies. And they are talking about building a third temple. They want to build a third temple. In fact, I read a story today that around 13 Israelis were arrested because they were going to smuggle in a whole bunch of goats into the Temple Mount and sacrifice them. They wanted to do an animal sacrifice, a mass animal sacrifice in the Temple Mount. These people were arrested and the goats were given over to veterinary care. And the Israeli government released a statement saying that these people, these zealots who wanted to commit a mass animal sacrifice in the Temple Mount, are inciters, that they were going to incite people. And by that, what the statement was saying was that by committing an animal sacrifice or multiple sacrifices on the Temple Mount, they were going to incite the Muslim population against the Jews. And it would have caused a huge plethora of problems. It would have opened up an entire sea of blood. I was going to say can of worms, but that's an understatement, a sea of blood. But these people, they want to build a third temple because they have this, and this is why they wanted to do the sacrifice, because they had this idea of building a third temple. Now, what happened after Christ? What happened after the crucifixion? Well, the temple was still around for a while after the crucifixion, but Jesus told the Jews, this temple that you guys revere so much is going to come crashing down, but I'm going to rebuild it. And they called him a blasphemer. But what Jesus was saying was, the temple is going to be destroyed, but I'm the temple. Don't worry, because I'm going to be killed. I'm going to resurrect after 3 days. I'm the temple. The temple has already been rebuilt. There's already a third temple. It's Christ. And this is why John, in the book of Revelation, he says, and I saw the new city, the new earth, and there was no temple. Why was there no temple? Because Christ is the temple. Christ is the third temple. There's already a third temple. But you have these lunatics who want to build an actual temple when the temple has already been rebuilt. It's Christ. Christ is the third temple. Christ is the temple. But these people don't believe that. And so after Christ's death and crucifixion, the great majority of the Jewish people, they were still revering the physical temple because they didn't see Christ as the temple. They saw Christ as a blasphemer, as a criminal, just like Ben Shapiro sees Christ as a criminal. And so they were focusing on their temple. Well, that temple was destroyed. And not only that, but the Jewish people butchered each other before the destruction of the temple. They were butchering each other in a horrendous civil war. Well, what's happening now? You have these fanatics who are obsessed with a temple. They don't know Christ, right? They reject Christ. They don't see Christ as the temple. They see Christ as a blasphemer. And so they're obsessed, just like the Jews in the past, they're obsessed with the idea of a temple. And so what do you have? You have this growing fanaticism. They're obsessed with the temple. They want to build the temple. They want to sacrifice on the Temple Mount. But they also hate the regular Jews who are not ultra-orthodox or who are not ultra-nationalist. And what happened back then during the Roman-Judean conflict? You had a whole bunch of fanatic Jewish people. They were obsessed with the temple. They were willing to butcher people for the temple. And they butchered their fellow Jew in the midst of their fanatical, sanguinary reverence for the temple. It's almost like history is about to rhyme. The song of history is about to rhyme. That's what I'm saying. But I want to read to you guys more of this article, and I'm almost done here. Very, very fascinating read. And I was reading this article today. I told myself I got to do a video on this. So going back, and I just said that these ultra-Orthodox Jews, they are willing to be violent against their fellow Jew. And this dovetails into this part of the article. Look what it says here. In June, confrontations. So this is very recent. This is all very recent stuff. In June, confrontations broke out between Palestinians and settlers near the unauthorized outpost of Oz-Zion. When a border police officer arrived to separate them, Netzah Yehuda soldiers intervened verbally. Quote, "Screw this border police cop now," they yelled at the settlers, encouraging them, inciting them to attack him. They were inciting other Jews to attack another Jew. Just like the Zealots in the Roman-Judean War incited the Arab Jews to kill other Jews. A few days later, there was a clash between settlers and the police in the Shiloh Valley. So these ultra-Orthodox Jewish soldiers, they're not just soldiers who want to read the Torah. They are soldiers with military training and weapons, and they're now inciting other Jews to attack other Jews. The soldiers from Netzah Yehuda began shouting at the police and security forces, "Don't incriminate fighters, traitors, and Jews are being evicted," said a military source with knowledge of the incident. One soldier spit at the forces. And this is all aggression. This is all aggression. And this is all presaging signs of something. These are presaging signs that something is about to implode in Israel. And I believe that as the years go on, as more and more of these ultra-Orthodox soldiers, more and more of these ultra-Orthodox Jews become soldiers, I believe that this sort of thing is going to become more and more common. And Israel is in a very difficult position because if it doesn't draft these soldiers, then Israel is going to be heavily undermanned because who's having the most rapidly growing population? It's the ultra-Orthodox. So if Israel doesn't draft these people, Israel's going to be undermanned. If Israel drafts these people, and I think Israel is going to draft these people, then Israel is going to have to deal with this religious insane asylum. So it says here, sometimes it's not just words. On weekends, more than once, soldiers from Netzah Yehuda showed up and took part in the violent incidents against Palestinians or security forces who came to the confrontations, said an officer in the Army Reserves who served in the sector in the past 2 years. So they are actually fighting with the security forces. So it's not just a matter of, just some nice religious people. No, these people are militant, and they are militant against other Jews. And one time, a Netzah Yehuda commander declared, "This is land of the Jewish people, and it will soon return to the Jewish people." And so they want ethnic cleansing, or worse, they want genocide. And they attack Palestinians. It says here that the military courts have also been lenient, as in a verdict in November 2019. According to the indictment filed by military prosecutors, a Netzah Yehuda soldier attacked Bedouin at a gas station in the south without provocation and while they were trying to call the police. In addition, other soldiers from the battalion were in a small bus, got off the vehicle while they were carrying their weapons, and for a few minutes struck people at the scene and aimed their locked and loaded weapons at them. The indictment reads, the result, a month and a half in prison for the soldier who launched the attack and disciplinary action against the rest. The defendant is a soldier who joined the IDF even though he could have continued with his Torah studies, the judges wrote in justifying their lenient sentence. The opinions and recommendations of the defendants, teachers, and commanders show that this is an upright young man, a positive soldier who carries out his role and missions in the very best way. And you know what the thing is? You could say, well, how about they break this unit up and then have the broken parts of this unit just absorbed by other units. They've talked about this, and guess what? No other units want these people. They don't want to deal with them because they're so disobedient. And it says here in the article, so the idea to divide up the battalions on different fronts, which has been brought up throughout the years, especially after serious incidents, gets filed back away. In close discussions, the position is always that no one really wants to receive them in their sector, said a senior defense official involved in the matter, because these people are nuts. And they're growing in the military, and they're going to have weapons and training. I mean, you have these people who are crazy already, right? They're crazy already. I mean, think about it. You have a whole population of people in a country. They're growing by the tens of thousands, and they're saying, we don't want to join the military. We don't want to work. We just want government welfare. So everyone, this is how much of a superiority complex these people have in their minds. We don't work. We don't join the military. We don't defend this country, but everyone else does, right? Everyone else has to work for us so that we can receive welfare, and everyone else has to fight for us. So these secular Jews, they're beneath us, and so because they're beneath us, they have to work for us and defend us. That's how much of a superiority complex these people have. Now, imagine these people now joining the military. Now you're giving them elite training. Now you're giving them guns. They're psychopaths and narcissists already without the training. But imagine them with the training. Imagine them with the training. And the article also mentions how these people in the military, they see military service as them carrying out their own ideology. It's them carrying out their own ideology. So they see military service as another dimension of their ideology. And the way I see it is that Israel has to face multiple fronts, right? Israel has to deal with Hezbollah. Israel has to face Iran. Israel has to deal with Hamas. Pretty soon, Israel is going to have to deal with Turkey. And I think in the future, Israel is going to have to deal with itself. And that's why I say that I believe that Israel eventually is going to implode on itself. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.